Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Woke Wild Women's podcast. I am Bethany Evans, and this is my co-host.
Hi, I'm Roxanne Sailors in Washington.
Oh, yes, and I'm in California. Excuse me. So just to give you guys a little heads up, there may be a tiny delay in our conversation just because the internet connection has been acting up this morning. So just giving you guys a heads up, there may be pauses or delays, or we start talking over each other just because there's we're not getting the entire conversation in real time. So just letting you guys know that before we begin. I hope it's not too distracting. So today Roxanne and I are going to be talking about a very juicy, possibly taboo topic that not everyone discusses, I think, in their everyday life, and that is codependency. And the reason we're talking about this today is this is one of the things I feel like Roxanne and I connected on, our own journeys on healing our codependent patterns and relationships. Me personally discovering what codependency was only about like 3 years ago, and not really fully knowing that that's what I was experiencing in most of my relationships, and all of the patterns and behaviors and the things that I didn't make me feel good were really stemming from this dynamic that I learned when I was a child. So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Excuse me. Would you like to say anything, Roxanne, before we dive into it?
I think that there are a lot of great resources out there, and we are just here today to talk about our experiences and offer what we've learned and we're still learning. I don't believe there's like a cure for codependency. It's an awareness, and it's many, many tiny choices that we make that determine the how do I say this? Let's start by defining codependency, because I was just about to go into that.
So. Okay. So yes, the geek in me is going to define for you codependency from the dictionary. It says of or relating to a relationship in which one person is physically or psychologically addicted as to alcohol or gambling, and the other person is psychologically dependent on the first in an unhealthy way. Yeah, so I think a lot of people do. I think if you're aware of codependency, you do associate it with addictions or people who are addicted to a substance, or but really it's not just the one person who's addicted to that substance. It also is an addiction for the person who's addicted to that person, or that the saving of that person. And it really comes from feeling like you need something outside of you to fill a void within yourself that you don't feel like you already have or can achieve for yourself without that thing or that person.
Yeah. For me, there's three. I look at there's three definitions. So there's codependence, there's independence. So that's where, like, I don't need anybody. I'm not dependent on any kind of relationship with anyone. It's just me. I'm fine. And then there's interdependence. And that, for me, is where I am working in my life, is to create an energetic agreement with somebody that meets between independence and codependence. So yes. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but let's talk about like what codependency, what a lot of people think that looks like, and what it may look like in a lot of situations, but it's not the only way to kind of identify codependency. So what have you heard, Bethany, of like what people assume codependency is?
The first thing that's coming to mind is like people thinking that, you're super needy and you need that person for validation or for some kind of, I don't know, to a certain response from that person. And I think that is essentially what it looks like. But I think, also it is a lot of the times associated with, substances like alcohol, drugs, gambling. those are the main ones I think people associate it with. However, like I was in a codependent relationship with my ex-husband, and neither of us were addicted to a type of substance. It was more, we just, I don't know, it's even hard to explain. We didn't feel like we could survive without the other, just the energy. It's just the energy exchange. Like he provided something for me and I provided something for him that we felt like was missing in our lives, or we didn't really realize could, yeah, I don't know. It's so hard to explain. It's this,
I know. Yeah.
yeah, it's such an odd thing to explain, but I think a lot of people think it has to do with somebody who's addicted to a substance mainly. And then, but then I don't think that people realize that that person is also codependent. I feel like the codependency gets labeled onto the person who isn't addicted to the substance or the outside thing.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times people think of a codependent as like the wife who will call the husband's office to say, you know, he's sick when he's actually like passed out drunk, or, um, you know, the wife who will deal with all the creditors when they're, I always say wife, just because we're women. And so we're
Yeah.
speaking from that perspective. There are men who are in codependent relationships with women. Absolutely.
Oh,
100%. I just can't speak to that. So, but you know, women who are, you know, working with banks and trying to like call off all the creditors when their husband is out like gambling every night. It's a very scary place to be. And a lot of people look from the outside looking in and think, how could somebody stay in that situation? You know, abuse is another codependent relationship. How could you stay in that? And I think it's easy for us to judge from the outside looking in. And when you start to identify what codependency actually looks like, there's a lot more similarities that maybe show up in our lives than we think.
yeah,
So,
I agree.
and
Here we go with the
you
talking
go,
over each other.
you
um,
go.
I was gonna say I definitely agree, because I think we all have, every single person on the planet has a form of codependency. It's like everything. I think it exists on a spectrum. It depends on how extreme it is for you in your life, how much it shows up for you, how much you enable it, and how much self-awareness you have around it. But I believe you can be codependent on anything, like food, um, just like watching TV, sex, uh, you know, I don't know. And it can get so much deeper into, just like within those broad topics, deeper into the things that you feel like you cannot live without if you don't have it. And it's because we associate things, we connect our emotions to certain things, right? So if something evokes a strong emotional response from us, then that thing tends to become like what we become addicted to, you know, whether that is a good like a quote unquote good or bad response that you're getting emotionally. It's just whatever I think evokes it's almost like that feeling of you feel alive, you know. Excuse me, my throat is clearing. I think this is
Yeah.
definitely needed. This is like, I feel like my throat chakra is clearing for myself and for everyone who needs to be able to talk about this.
Yes. Thank you.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to take a look in all areas of our life where codependency occurs. Uh, and here's where we get really vulnerable. I'm speaking on the internet where anybody can hear this. So
Yeah.
my last job um, unwittingly found me in a codependent relationship with my boss.
Hmm.
Um, and I am now back there temporarily, having identified that was codependent and choosing a different way to enter into the workplace now.
Hmm.
Um, but it's fascinating. I mean, it can happen between parent and child. It can happen between coworkers. It can happen in intimate relationships, friendships, families. I mean, it's just, and like you said, it can happen with inanimate objects such as drugs or your phone.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep, exactly.
yeah, and
Even with
I think
yourself.
there's some overart.
You can have,
What?
I was gonna say, even with yourself, you can have a codependent relationship with yourself. You know what I mean? Like two
Yeah,
aspects of you. I don't know why that just made me laugh. I was thinking about isolation, and
yeah.
how,
In that independence
yes,
is
independent. Yep.
really,
That's like
it's
the
like
other
the flip
extreme.
side.
Yes. So we, like what you were talking about, like, and I just mentioned the spectrum is like, that's what the codependency and then independence. And we're trying to find the middle balanced ground of interdependence between the two, because both of them are the extremes, the opposite polarity.
Yeah. Yeah. There's different, so I want to just, can I jump into
Yeah.
my papers?
Yes,
Because we're nerds
we
and
are.
we like doing research and we like, um, I like sharing what I know. I went to a Codependence Anonymous meeting earlier this year with a friend of mine who, and I don't want to say I went for her. I went for myself to see what it was about. She continued going for a little while. And I got some really valuable information out of it. My husband's in a recovery program. He's been in recovery for about 2 years and actually really working the program. I almost started crying. I am so proud of him.
Aww.
And I hope he hears this because he listens to the podcast.
Yay.
But it really had me looking, at where am I in the pattern? I'd never been, I'd never been in a relationship with an addict. Although I think that my first marriage was in many ways codependent. But I'm kind of off on a tangent. I went to this Codependence Anonymous meeting, and I got some great handouts that really helped illuminate what codependency looks like in some very real, concise, easy to understand examples.
Yeah.
And I just want to let everybody know, and we'll give more of this at the end, but you can go to coda.org to download any of these
Yes.
forms. So,
Cool.
so codependence shows up in many different areas. There are compliance patterns, so needing somebody else to do something, follows a certain pattern, especially an unspoken agreement. There are low self-esteem patterns where you need the other person to feel good about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Control patterns where you need to be in control of a situation in some way, shape, or form, or you need to be controlled to feel safe.
Yep.
Denial patterns, so pretending things don't exist, that's a big one that I think came up in my husband's family history patterns. And then avoidance. It's the same type of thing. Denial, avoidance, just like, we'll talk about it tomorrow.
That's the one
We'll deal with it
that's
later.
came up in my family. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are all things that come up in every relationship. And the piece that has it become codependent is when you feel like a victim, when you feel like you can't change the outcome of a certain situation, that you will be trapped in the loop.
Yeah. I'm not getting your actual
Yeah,
needs met.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's one big thing. There's a lack of understanding of us as individuals and what we actually want and need, or being able to, or we kind of conditioned ourselves starting from childhood to believe that it was not okay to feel a certain way, or to need something that we need because the other person didn't understand it or wasn't willing to give it to us, or wasn't able. And so therefore we changed then our behavior to get that connection that we need, to that love, because we can't do everything on our own, right? We're social creatures. We do need each other to thrive and to survive. So I think that that's where it stems from, and feeling, so you reach for something else, like you become basically somebody different, or at least coming from my perspective, that's what it was for me, is like becoming someone different in order to get my needs met, because I didn't feel like, because if I said what I really needed or what I really wanted, it wasn't going to happen. And that felt worse than changing who
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. Where do we want to go from here? I'm sure we each have examples of experiences in our life where we found ourselves in codependence.
Yeah.
Um, and this is where conversations usually stop. They
Right.
talk about theory, and we don't really want to share our part in a dysfunctional relationship.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. For me, if you want me to go, I'm still learning. I apologize for the dogs, if you can hear them. Those are not the neighbor's dogs. Those are our dogs here. So,
oh, okay.
they don't make as much of an appearance as the dogs next door. But anyways, if you listen to our podcast, you know what I'm talking about. So, I'm still really learning and seeing my own patterns for what they are, and what I tend to do, and the type of people I tend to be attracted to, or who are attracted to me. And it's all in service of my own healing. But I tend to be the savior. If somebody has some kind of crisis going on in their life, or something that they need, I don't know, I'm able to hold space for people and allow people to just be experiencing what they have, because I feel like I've experienced a lot of heavy stuff, um, starting from childhood. So yeah, to me, I want to be the savior. And that's how I felt like that's what my purpose was. That's how I derived my sense of self-worth. And it would, a lot of the time, it would be like I did feel like I didn't have a choice. So no matter who was coming to me or what was happening in my life, I had to put everything aside, all of my needs and whatever I was experiencing in my life, in order to help this person, because I was able to do that. Just because I'm able to doesn't mean that I have to. I've realized that now, and that's actually a realization that I, coming off of this week, have realized, and I'm actually setting boundaries. That's really about personal boundaries. I think for me, and I know for you too, is being able to state and hold the boundaries. I have a really hard time, and especially with my son, holding firm boundaries with him, because this is what happens to me, is like people will keep pushing me because they know that my boundaries are weak. And it's all because I want people to like me. I want, I can't handle if somebody doesn't like me and what I'm doing. I'm not so much anymore, but that's really what it was, is like, and I also couldn't handle hurting somebody else. Like if I did or said something that made somebody angry or upset or sad, or I hurt them in some way, like I just like wanted to kill myself. Like it's the worst feeling in the world to feel like you're responsible for somebody else's pain, or at least, but that's what I would associate it with, was like, um, this is why I stayed in my marriage for so long.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love him as a person, and I could never say anything bad about him. He's one of my best friends, and he always will be. And I'm so grateful that we have a son together. But there were needs that I wasn't getting met, that I didn't fully understand. I think like I kind of came to fully understand, but I was still operating unconsciously. And um, I knew that if I communicated these things, it was going to hurt his feelings, because he's very sensitive. He is a highly sensitive person, just like I am. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to see, it's almost like you become a martyr, where you're like, I would rather be the one in pain than have this person who I care about so much be in pain, and you can only do that for so long, until you get to the point. Like, I think, I don't know if we were recording when we were talking about this, but you had said something, and I think it was from one of your papers, Roxanne, about, oh gosh, I can't even remember, but what was I just saying? about not wanting to see the other person in pain. I don't
In
know.
pain.
You had said something about something
Um,
perfect. Now I can't remember, and I just went blank.
yeah. It was probably the believing that people are incapable of taking care of
Yes.
themselves.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
that's a
that's what,
codependent pattern.
yeah, exactly. And I think
Yeah.
that's what I tend to do is I grew up seeing both of my parents go through extremely difficult circumstances when I was very young. My dad was an addict and has been clean for only maybe about 10, no, like 8, 9, maybe 10 years at the most, which I'm so proud of him too. And I don't know if he'll ever watch any of these, but he's doing really well in terms of, I just see he has a lot of self-discipline when he wants to. So I'm very proud of him. And so anyways, he struggled with that. And I don't know, I don't remember a lot from my childhood. And sometimes I wish I did, but I also don't know if it's actually necessary. I remember bits and
Yeah.
pieces, but I know there was abuse. My dad and my mom had a very volatile relationship. And I know that I took that on, and I from an early age learned to uh, become in tune with what everyone else was experiencing to try to understand what was actually happening. Because as a child, you're kind of just like, I feel all these things and I don't really understand what's happening. So I think that's why I'm very good at observing things and understanding what being intuitive, like it was a result of trauma for me. I don't necessarily think I was born into it and like, was this holy child of God that had this thing bestowed upon her. It was like, no, it resulted from experiencing a lot of painful stuff as a child, and not really understanding why, needing to come up with my own, tapping into my own intuition because of it. So anyways, what was I saying? So yeah, I know that my mom was in a lot of pain and she stayed in the relationship because of us and because she was getting advice from a religious institution at the church that they were in, and it wasn't the greatest advice. It was like, no, you're married, so you have to stay in the relationship even though it's abusive and even though he's cheating on you and even though all these things. um and yeah, so it ended, the way it ended was in a domestic violence encounter, and my mom was really badly hurt. And so i I grew up seeing the adults in my life, my two, like the two um, closest adults I had to myself, like feeling like they weren't able to take care of themselves, and as a child, that's really confusing and weird. And you're kind of like, okay, well, I guess like first I have to learn how to take care of myself. And then it looks like I'm going to have to take care of these adults in my life because they obviously don't know what the fuck they're doing. I'm sorry. I have to laugh about it because, like I'm
You
able
have
to
to
talk
laugh or you'll
about it.
cry.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's, I've done so much healing work around it that I'm able to talk about it. That's why I'm able to talk about it and not get super upset. But um, yeah, that's where it's like, that's where if somebody is experiencing something difficult, my automatic is to think, oh, they need me, they need me because they can't deal with it on their own. And maybe they do. And I think that it's important, like sometimes we do need other people to support us or to lift us up or to help us through a difficult period, but that doesn't mean then forever. It's like you want to break that
Yeah.
cycle of like, I'm allowing you to support me right now because I can't do it for myself, but then let go and step back and put that faith and that trust in me that then I can start to do that for myself because you've now shown me what it feels like to do that. So now I have to learn how to do it for myself. um,
Right.
so that's, I think, where there's nothing, I feel like there's nothing wrong with codependency in that sense, as long as it's not something you feel like you, um, uh, I don't know, like if you can notice it and be like, okay, I'm doing this thing, but I'm supporting this person, or this is happening, I'm using this thing, but you have some kind of like awareness around being able to know that, I don't know, like you don't absolutely need it. You're not going to die without it. um, I feel like you can fluctuate on the spectrum of independence, codependence, interdependence, and there's nothing wrong with going in between those dynamics, in relationships.
Right. And there is, that's the beautiful thing about being able to live in a non-binary world. There is no absolutes.
Yeah.
Like it's a spectrum, and we all need to fall on different parts of that spectrum in different parts of our lives. For example, this just came up the other day when my best friend died when I was 26, suddenly in a tragic mountain climbing accident. And it was shocking and devastating. And I did not know how to deal with the news, with my grief, with like just even taking care of myself. It was nuts. I needed somebody to take care of me. And fortunately, the codependence that I had developed with my mother came in beautifully. And my mother supported me in such a beautiful way during that time, because we knew each other's dynamic. I knew how to be nurtured by her. I knew how to just let her take care of me.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect example in my life where that codependent relationship actually served me really well. Now, not so much in other areas of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I want you to go back, but I wanted to share it. I love that you shared that, because it made me think about how when I left my marriage, like the thing that that I struggle with most is like financial or like physical stability, like creating that for myself or feeling like I'm capable of sustaining that. And that's what he kind of provided for me. And so then when I left that relationship and I live with family now, and it's family. It's not just my mom or just like one person. It's like my mom, her twin sister, my dad, all of us in the same house. And that it really.
And your twin sister's married, right?
Yes, and her husband's here too. We live in a big house, and then my son. But that's where allowing them to support me for these last like 3 years, and now that I'm getting ready to like fully be pushed out, and like be independent and on my own, it's really scary, but I also feel ready. It's like, but I think that's a great example. What you just gave is they were able to support me while I was going through all of this, and how it actually served me. And I don't know how I would have gotten through the divorce and the separation of being with somebody for almost 10 years, and the healing of all the stuff that I was going through, if I didn't live in this codependent dynamic still. And now I see where they want to keep me in this codependent pattern, but I'm ready to move on. And I see the things that that I guess the behaviors from them that I used to fall into, get sucked into,
Yeah.
as I'm about to leave and be like, and that's where I can see that that's where I get the codependency from, is they don't realize that, okay, now it's safe for them to believe that I can do it on my own. Right. So that's, anyway, so I just wanted to share that, because I love that story that you just told. When we're grieving, when we're going through really difficult periods of healing, we do need other people to take care of some of the needs we can't do for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think about my current marriage, and I think about how we're developing an interdependent relationship. We rely on the other person to source us in specific areas because we have an agreement. And this is our agreement. This is not how all marriages go, or how all marriages should go, or that you should be married to have this kind of relationship.
Right.
But we had a situation, I guess it was 2 years ago, where my husband was underemployed for a little while. And so I took on a full-time position. This is where my codependent relationship with my work started, because I was there all the time. And for my husband, we needed that. We needed that financial security, but that's not part of our, what makes us feel good in a relationship, but also as individuals. And so our relationship is interdependent in the fact that my husband loves making money. It's exciting to him. It's like a game.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, having to navigate the whole financial world is frustrating, even though I work in accounting and things like that. But anyway, for us, it worked better for him to work full time and for me to be home so that I can take care of him, because that sources me in a very positive way. Now, I don't wipe his ass,
You don't? Why
but
not?
and there are times when I have to remind him, hey, this is our agreement. And yes, I appreciate you going out and making the money. And I still need to hear that you appreciate what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But to get back to the whole, codependency, it for some people, it can be very subtle. Like if you're in this agreement, for example, when my husband and I were in this agreement and then we had to shift gears, there were some resentments that came up. There was, we started behaving in different ways towards each other, and it started to get a little like, codependent. Like he needed, I'm just kind of throwing out some ideas. Like he needed me to tell him to go look for a job.
Right.
And and
Something you think an
and I
adult would automatically do for themselves, like,
yeah.
yeah. But that's kind of like, but
And
it's kind of like being a teenager and your mom telling you, hey, you should probably go get a job.
yeah. Yeah. So, and so relationships do go back and forth across that spectrum. And I think as coaches, especially, we've learned to just identify, hey, are you in a relationship? Are you in an unspoken agreement or a spoken agreement
Yeah.
that doesn't serve you anymore?
Yeah.
To be able to back up enough to look at it and go, that worked for me for a time. It doesn't work for me now. Let's
Exactly.
renegotiate this relationship. And of course,
Yeah.
if somebody's not willing to have that conversation, it's because they're depending on you to stay who you are,
Yeah.
so that they can feel good about the relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. And then that's when that's how we get stuck in the relationships, is if the one, we think that, oh, well, this is as good as it's going to get, or I don't want to be disconnected from this person, or I don't want to end the relationship. And if they're not willing to budge or to do anything differently, but you have to end it. And that's how I felt like what happened with my marriage was, um, I really wanted him to do things for him and not for me, not to get a response from me. And that's what it felt like. And, if the person's not able, if they have so much resistance to looking at their own patterns, there's not much you can do. You kind of just have to, do what's best for you in that moment. That's what I've learned, is I've learned how to let relationships go, even though it's really difficult sometimes if you feel really connected to a person. Um, and that's where you develop your independence. And when you develop your independence, you can become aware of what your needs are, what your wants are, and how to communicate them honestly and authentically, and not and realize that if the other person isn't willing to hear you, then they're not in a space to be in a healthy relationship with you, and they need to do their own work. um, that was one thing that I also did, was I allowed me and him to stay comfortable and not do our own healing work by not ending the
Yes.
relationship multiple times when I felt like I needed to. Instead, I knew it was going to be difficult, and I didn't want to feel my emotions on top of his, all of it. I just wasn't ready. Sometimes we're just not ready, and there's nothing wrong with it. It just means you have to see what's actually, you have to pull yourself out of it and see what's actually happening, you know.
Yeah. And that's where support is so key. Beth, as people who have listened to the podcast know, Bethany and I met in a life coaching program, and I received so much support in that year,
Me
coming
too.
together for a weekend a month and being able to be really open-hearted with what was going on in my marriage, because that
Yeah.
was when my husband's drinking was at its worst. Um, and to get the support of other people who could hold that space for me. Um, and there are lots of other ways to get supported. I also want to chime in here, because I do hear, especially in women's conversations, sometimes there's a desire or not a desire, but there's a tendency, I think, for us to kind of get on the man bashing train, or the this is just how it is kind of assumption.
Yeah,
And, as coaches, we have learned how to support without continuing to reinforce the stories that have us stay stuck.
exactly.
So,
I think
you
it
don't
goes
have
both
to
ways.
have a.
Sorry.
Mhm.
That men also do that with women. I hear a lot of men
Oh
say,
yeah,
"Oh, she's just crazy," or like things like that. And it's like, no, dude, like you're not taking responsibility for, the for your story around it.
yeah,
Just like sometimes women, we want to, we want to blame the other party, but yeah, it goes both ways.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, to get even a higher elevation on it. How do we as a society
Hmm.
assume that one or the other is responsible? I love watching TV. I love watching TV shows. I love the stories, especially the really crazy ones, like soap opera type things. But I was just watching a show this morning that's set in India, and there was a husband who was cheating on his wife, and everybody, the culture just assumed that the woman was a slut,
Mm,
even though that was like her first sexual experience, and he had cheated on girlfriend after girlfriend. Like, that's how he went through relationships. And it was one of those moments where it's like, wow, that's fascinating. That's just perpetuating this belief that that's how things should just be.
right.
And that's where we get stuck, whether it's codependency or something else. But in this case, just assuming that we don't get to be happy because that's not how it's supposed to be is um, it's tragic and wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. I don't think, yeah, I see so much suffering um, in people because of that, because they don't feel like they have any power to change their life and the circumstances that, maybe they were. Like, I feel like, we are, in a sense, quote unquote victims, if you want to label it, when we're children, because we're born into families we don't get to choose.
Vulnerable.
We're vulnerable. We don't get to choose the conditioning that we're brought up in. It's not until we are adults that we actually have that power to choose. But by then, it's usually like our willpower and our sense of self-worth has become so beaten down or put into other people's hands that we feel like we don't have the power to change it. And it is, if you're surrounded by people who are still in that dynamic that you're trying to heal from, you're going to have a really difficult time getting yourself out of it without the support around you. And I think obviously that's why we have codependence anonymous groups. That's why there's alcoholics anonymous or narcotics anonymous groups, because you need to be with people who are experiencing the same thing, who really understand you and who are also on the same path to break those patterns that you're trying to create, not the ones who are just
Yes.
perpetuating them. um
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, surrounding yourself with people who want to change their story, want
Yeah,
to become more empowered in their lives. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and to be themselves. And whether that means you have to leave certain people for a time or for good, like that's just that you kind of get to the place where you can see it from a higher perspective of like, what would I rather do? Would I rather just like kill myself slowly, drain my energy slowly for another person, or, you know, make peace
Or
with,
be really uncomfortable.
yeah,
Yeah, or be really uncomfortable for a short period of time as you speak your truth.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And knowing that nothing's going to happen to you. Like, and I think that's what, there's that fear of, if I say this, if I do this, there's going to be repercussions, some kind of abuse, whether that's actual physical or verbal, or it's like really it's the removing of the connection, the thing that we need the most, which is connection and love. And that's really where the fear comes from, is if I do or say this thing that's authentic to me, um, this person or these people are going to leave me, and then I'm going to be all alone. And if I'm all alone, I'm going to die, because it's really been proven by science. They've done studies, with like monkeys, and I'm sure, I think mostly monkeys, but where, we can survive without food and water for days and weeks. But if you don't have connection to another, human, we would die from that earlier than we would die from not having food and water.
Yeah, that's why solitary confinement is like the worst,
Yep.
the worst thing imaginable
Mm-hmm.
in jail. Not that I know, but I mean, that's a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think another thing to point out is once you start this journey of like identifying where you are being codependent or where relationships are not serving us, and how do we navigate through changing that relationship, what you said, we're born into these families and these situations that that inform us for better or for worse as we become adults. And as we become adults, it's a lot of unraveling and untelling of who we are based on these past experiences. So it's not easy work. And a lot of times, the experience that you're having in one relationship is actually linked to past relationships, like all the way down. So when you start to work on healing a relationship, you are really going through a lot of other iterations of that. And my current husband, when we were first married, this is even before he was in recovery, but there were a lot of times when I would react very extremely to something that he did or said, and he would be unusually calm, and he would identify, he's like, I think you're upset about something that is not me. I think this is coming up from your previous marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that enough times that I started to pay attention, and all of a sudden I realized, like, he had never given me reason to believe that he would ever like say mean and hurtful things to me.
Yeah.
And my ex-husband had a tendency to, like, he knew my buttons and he would dig, and it would be, it would really hurt a lot. And so when I'd hear Eric, my current husband, saying something, I would fly off the handle.
Yeah.
And I think it's a perfect example of, like, we carry these wounds forward from relationship to relationship. And
yep.
So, you've got to unravel it piece by piece. And so sometimes there are, especially relationships, for example, my relationship with my mom, I'm not going to just cut her out of my life. I mean, I do love her, but our relationship is weird and complicated.
Yeah.
And I had to just find my boundaries. Like, I had to determine, like, I know my boundaries now, so I'm actually able to have a much more positive and far less codependent relationship with her, because I know my limits and I know my boundaries.
Yes.
So, I spend no more than 2 or 3 days with her, about every other month. And then I can hold space and I can see her for the beautiful person she is. But if we spend too much time together,
oh yeah,
or see each other too often, all of a sudden I turn into this crazy teenager that I'm like, that's not who I am anymore. I've done so much work, but that's a deep, old, very, very close relationship. I mean, it was always me and my mom. I'm an only child and my dad wasn't around. So it's integral to who I am.
Yeah.
So to have to put boundaries on such an early relationship is tough, but
yeah,
it's worth it.
Yeah, it is worth it. It can be very difficult. It's, we're not saying any of this is easy. You need that consistent practice and awareness and reflection of like what's actually happening, like being able to put yourself into the position of like, okay, I can see that, okay, she's doing this. How can I respond that's not getting sucked into that dynamic to create what I'm trying to break myself from. I can so relate to that with my relationship with my mom, because I especially recently I've noticed, like, she gets all frazzled and worried and she'll say things and she wants to, like, suck you into her worry because she doesn't know how to deal with it. And I just respond, I'm like I just have zero charge about it, and I just say exactly what I think. So it's like, if she's like, complaining about something, or, like, oh, I think this person should do that and blah, 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 blah. I'll just be like, why? Like, but he chose that. Like, why do you, why are you trying to like tell, it just kind of is like, you have to really, what it is about is like, I think people don't know how to deal with it on their own. So they start projecting it onto you. And that's where I think, like for me, like I tend to absorb other people's energy. So it's really about realizing that it's actually coming from them and putting it back onto them, kind of like, oh, I see that you're thinking or feeling this way, and really not allowing yourself to, get sucked into that play, that role that they need.
Yeah. To take responsibility for their emotions.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And while being able to still love them and be kind and, I think that's you can't judge what's happening or expect them to be different. You just have to take responsibility for your own energy and be authentic to what it is you see and what and you can always say anything in a nice way. And that's practice too, is the communication piece. Choosing the language that's not charged, that's just simply kind of matter of fact, or just the way that you're owning it and taking accountability for your own stuff while, being able to communicate what you see is happening. That's a huge practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at, I want to just share, because we are talking about some good examples and just taking the awareness and being able to shift the context, shift how we see things through this lens of the Codependence Anonymous recovery patterns. There's a couple of really good ones, and I just wanted to share some. When I first went to this Codependence Anonymous meeting, I was looking at all these and looking at, okay, where are my patterns in relationships, and based on these descriptions. And actually a big chunk of my codependence is found in my self-esteem. I really rely on a lot of people to give me my self-esteem. And I have a lot of avoidance patterns, which comes from being in a childhood where my father was extremely angry and abusive. And so, I did whatever I could to avoid getting angry, avoid being in, the blast radius of some, I'd do anything to avoid making somebody angry. And it's interesting because that's one of the ones that is part of that avoidance patterns. When you're in a codependent relationship or when you are behaving as a codependent, you judge harshly what others think, say, or do. And that's probably that's one of the biggest issues I have with my mother. A lot of what she says is, in my view, the way I hear it, is extremely judgmental. But I thought that was an interesting codependent, not personality trait, but that was like an indicator of a codependent relationship, and that you're trying to avoid something. So when you're recovering from that, you learn to keep an open mind and accept people as they are. So you were just talking about that. To be able to be in that space can be really confronting, because you have to allow, you can't avoid that person's being who they are. You can't, just taking away that desire to just judge them, make them wrong, and then dismiss them. You have to be with them in their shit.
Yeah, so. Exactly. I completely agree. And I apologize if there's background noise here. I don't know if you can hear that. Can you? There's a blow dryer going on in the room next to me. Anyways. Yeah.
Never a dull moment.
Never. This is real life, guys. Real life. So I don't even know what I was going to say, but because I got distracted by that. Go ahead. I was going to say being able to be with people who are being something that makes you uncomfortable, like being judgmental. Like I can't stand people judging other people for no reason. Like I'm always one to seek to understand why somebody does something. the reason that they do things or the reason they are the way they are, like I tend to get curious about like, that was really mean. Like why, and then like, but it's also because like, I think I can get stuck in my own judgment, and I hear a lot of judgments like in my own head. Like I see things and I make a
Oh
judgment
yeah.
and I'm like, that wasn't very nice. Like, what are you thinking about that for?